Hey, what's up? Yeah, look at me streaming again. And of course, as always, doing my checks. Working with a new microphone, so I don't have the headset on. We'll see how that goes. Not sure how I feel about it. But everything's working, and we're live. So today, we are going to look at the Warhammer community article that kind of leaked I guess leaked isn't the right word. I don't think it's intentional. I don't think it is a leak when it's intentional. It's more of a preview. Using the word leak kind of insinuates that it was sneaky or, not the plan. So, we've got the Old World Almanac. First look at the rules. We're going to talk about that and maybe a couple other things here. There is a link in the description. It is to my website. It is a compilation that I've been working on slowly of getting all the Warhammer community articles and all the old world news kind of compiled into one location. So feel free to click that and check it out. If there's something I missed, feel free to let me know so I can get that changed. Drop it in the comments. That's helpful. I'm excited about the old world. In case you all didn't know, I was huge into Warhammer Fantasy, and honestly, I am to a point where I'd probably revisit Fantasy 8th Edition anyway, even if the old world wasn't coming, just because I have been really, for the last couple years, looking for that fix. Like, the rank and file, kind of a rules-heavy game. Positioning matters a lot. I've been kind of jonesing for that, and honestly, I was tempted to look at the 8th Edition stuff anyway. And then we were looking at Ice and Fire, a couple of us. And then one of my buddies was like, dude, Old World's coming out. Let's just look at that old fantasy and prep for Old World. We all have, some fantasy stuff, except for me. I have a little bit, but I lost most of it in the fire. So it's not like I had all the stuff I used to be sitting on. At one point, I had a high elf army and a dark elf army. And I actually gave the dark elf army to just some random kid who was getting into Sigmar. Yeah, sounds good, man. Appreciate you jumping on. Big shout out to Proxy Hammer, another YouTuber. He does Eldari content. Has been really huge and supportive. And he doesn't have volume on, so I'm gonna hit him in chat in just a minute. But he's been huge and supportive. And that's one thing I found is that we all seem to do a great job of supporting each other. Let me answer him in chat. Awesome. Now, that's a pretty good intro. As always, I talk a lot. Bear with me. All right. The Old World is nearing release in early 2024. There's rumors that it's going to be January. Those are just rumors. Again, before I dig into this, yes, I'm an employee. No, I don't have any insider information. Everything I say is 100% rumor and speculation. And again, I always have to say that just because if my boss finds out that like somebody's like, well, this Chris dude on YouTube said this, then my boss has to come and look at it and make sure I actually said that stuff. Like, hey, no. This is unrelated. I don't have any insider information. As the Warhammer Design Studio unrolls the last of the Green Flock, it's time for us to start taking a longer look at the actual rules of the game in a new series of articles in the run-up to release. So like I said, rumor is it's January. I'd be fine with January. I feel like that's almost too soon. Not too soon to launch. Like, I'm just not ready. I wanted to get more of my stuff kind of built and painted and ready, and I don't know that I'm going to be able to. Like, that's a personal thing. Not GW's going too fast. I'm just not ready. If you're on Twitch, there's an ad break coming in about a minute. Today, the Old World Almanac looks at the basic structure of the game and the first main phase, the strategy phase. So let me zoom this out a little bit so we can see it better. There we go. The Old World is a new game designed from the ground up to simulate large regiments meeting in combat as volleys of arrows and artillery shot soar overhead. Cavalry, wizards, heroes, and monsters crash into combat all around them. That's not to say that it hasn't taken plenty of inspiration from what came before it, including several popular editions of the Warhammer Fantasy battles. Much of the complexity has been kept, and in particular regarding morale, added. But a lot of thought has been put into the structure of the phases, in particular when units and characters might use their abilities. Okay. There's a lot to unpack there, because they said a lot without actually saying a lot. Okay? And what I mean by that is, first things first, the complexity has been kept. All right? So that tells me that the movement phase is by and large not changing a ton. We're still going to have wheels. We're still going to have reforms, things of that nature, which is, again, what draws me to these games. The complexity and the precision required in moving your units is what pulls me into these types of fantasy style games, these rank and file games. The interesting caveat there is that, in particular regarding morale, added. Now, in a previous article, they talked about how morale is going to function a little bit differently. I believe it gets mentioned again here. We'll find out. But I think, if memory serves, and again, we'll find out in a minute, but if memory serves, there's a slight tweak in it to where you might not necessarily just be army-wide running if you fail a morale check. Because that was always one of the biggest issues a lot of people had with old fantasy, was that if you had an army that could fail morale, and they did, a lot of times you could have like big chunks of your army just run away. And that could give the feel-bads, and I get that. And a lot of thought has been put into the structure of the phases, in particular when units and characters might use their abilities. Bam. Right there. I've got it highlighted. So again, what that tells me is that GW is taking a half step into modern gaming, which is what they've slowly been doing with a lot of the other games. You've got, and it started really probably with Lord of the Rings, if we're being honest. Well, give me a second. You don't have volume, so I'm typing. It's pretty much same structure as AOS and really old fantasy outside of strategy phase as well. Okay, so the strategy phase, right? Proxy Hammer, one of the viewers on YouTube, had mentioned that this looks like 40K structure, and we'll get to that. Like I said, it seems like we're taking a half step forward into more modern gamings where other things do alternating activations. What GW has done is, instead of alternating activations, we're just increasing the interactivity on each player's turn. And that tells me that we're doing that. They did it in AOS, and they did it very well in AOS. Hello, sorry for bothering you. I want to offer your promotion of your channel. Oh, man, that sounds great. We are going to go ahead and, can we just delete this? I don't remember how to do that. That's fine. I'm sure it's the best. Thank you. Like a spam bot in my chat settings. Can we get rid of him? All right. One area that leaves me a little worrisome. Okay, so the strategy phase. During the strategy phase, the active player attempts to cast enchantment or hex spells and makes use of certain special rules before attempting to rally any fleeing units. So you'll notice as we look at this, there's no magic phase anymore. The magic phase has been broken up into the different phases. Now, what isn't said is how magic works. Are we going to have an AOS style interaction where, or not AOS, 40K style interaction where if you just have a wizard, you roll one die, and then on like a 2-up, the spell succeeds and you get to do whatever? Or are we still going to be making our magic checks and dispel attempts? Now, I personally, I hope that we still have magic checks and dispel attempts. Now, I know that they were talking about the dice pools maybe going away, which isn't necessarily a big deal as long as we still have access to like ways to counterspell and stuff like that. This isn't 40K. We don't need it to be streamlined. We don't need it to be fast. That's not what this game's about. So I'm hopeful that they just broke up different spells into different phases and you still do your checks and your dispels and stuff. Now, I don't know. Other than that, you get to attempt to rally any fleeing units. So again, very, very normal interaction so far. We then go to the movement phase, and this, the way it reads, literally hasn't changed at all. So what's going to happen is the movement phase starts. Let's zoom in just a little bit more. Let's get that movement phase nice and big for you guys. The movement phase starts with the declaration of charges, charge reactions, and then movement of charging units. I just did a video on that. First half of the movement phase, I'm going to be breaking into 2 videos. So check that out for sure. After you do all your charges, you do your compulsory movements. Compulsory movements are fleeing units, any kind of mandatory movement that you have to do. And by and large, things will tell you if it's compulsory. So even in 8th edition fantasy, if it wasn't a fleeing unit and it had to happen in the compulsory portion, it would generally still say that. After you do your charges and then you do your compulsory movements, you get to cast conveyance spells. Now, again, we don't know what any of this is yet. Again, the assumption is that conveyance, enchantment, hex, these are all just keywords that they tag spells with. And what's interesting about that, well, let's on task. The shooting phase. During the shooting phase, the active player shoots with those units in their army armed with missile weapons, with their war machines, and attempts to cast magic missile and magical vortex spells. Yeah, agreed. Really hopeful we still have dispelling. That's my real worry, is that it goes to 40K style magic. So again, all of these make sense. If it's a missile weapon or a magical attack that works like a missile weapon, it happens in the shooting phase. Good afternoon, Dan. Dan, the man, like man, and boy. Oh gosh. Is there a GIF option in here? I need to. Dan, if you have the opportunity, you should Google the Ripping Friends, man, and boy, but do not watch it if you are at work. It's a kids-ish show that was on when I was a teenager, so when you were a teenager as well. I don't know if you ever saw it. But that is one of the most horrific episodes I've ever seen in my life. And it's available on YouTube. So then you go to the combat phase. During this phase, units fight in deadly hand-to-hand melee, and wizards attempt to fend off their attackers with assailment spells. Units that have lost combat may be driven back or may become broken and flee at the end of this phase. Once all combats are resolved, the active player's turn ends. So again, what's interesting here is the assailment spells, right? And then the driven back or broken and flee. Driven back and then flee. So that tells me that leadership is going to interact just a little bit differently. You know, curious to see what driven back means. Curious to see how that interacts in the rules. Because I already know what broken and flee is. You know, we all know that if we played fantasy or even old 40K. So the old world is a game of rounds and turns. Each game is broken down into a number of rounds. During each round, both players will take a turn, each of which is broken down into 4 main phases, blah, 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 blah. So that's just telling you what we just read. Now we're going to talk about the strategy phase because that's what GW gave us today. well, really, I think this was yesterday, but we begin with the start of the turn subphase, which is when certain units perform special actions or take tests. These aren't common, and their details will be clearly stated in the rules. For example, stone trolls would take their stupidity test at this juncture. So this right here is just replacing the old at the beginning of your turn step in 8th ed. So things like bonehead, stupidity, things that happen at the start of the turn, they just happen here. And that's also when Night Goblin Fanatics are placed on the table. Let's go. That is some fantastic art. I love it. The Troll and the Empire. They're going to honk and bonk little Susie. Sorry. Again, I make myself laugh. So to hell with all of you if you don't think I'm funny. Additionally, a particular scenario may require you to check whether a victory condition has been met at this point. You may also use this period to tidy the table, removing. So this right here, I'm telling you, this is just copied and pasted from the 8th edition rulebook. So again, like these types of things that I'm seeing really make me excited. Again, 8th ed wasn't my favorite edition, but it wasn't because 8th ed was necessarily bad from a core rules standpoint. 8th ed had a lot of issues with battle tomes and everything else. Like the game was already dying at that point, so it is what it is. The second subphase is more exciting, the command phase. This is when character special rules fire off. For instance, a Bretonnian lord, let's go, brandishing the falcon horn of Friedemund may blow it in the command subphase. He's going to toot his own horn, hopefully preventing opponents from being able to fly. During the command subphase of their turn, if they are not engaged in combat, this character may attempt to use his falcon horn by making a leadership test using their own unmodified leadership. If this test is passed until your next start of turn subphase, so just until your next strategy phase, really, enemy units cannot use the fly special rule, and that's really good. Because there's some nasty stuff with fly in there. And it just says enemy units. It doesn't say like non-Bretonnian. So if your opponent is a total goon and running just like all Pegasus Knights, because it's funny, you can just be like, nah, dog, they just regular Knights now. So I'll be curious to see, again, a little bit of a digression. But as a person who used to play Wood Elves and Bretonnia, pretty excited to get some Bretonnian stuff back on the table. And I'm curious to see if we get the like the Lance formation and stuff back. Okay. I haven't looked at this spell down here, and I'm not going to yet. I've read most of this article already, but we're going to look at this spell together. However, the third step of the strategy phase is conjuration. When you cast enchantments or hexes, players take it in turns during this step to choose wizards who aren't attempting to flee to cast spells. The Tomb Kings, for instance, might choose to cast Dejaf's, incantation of Cursed Blaze from the lore of Nehekara. It's probably Nehekara. What's a casting value? We'll go into more detail on magic during another article. Well, and I figured, that would be the case. But yeah, absolutely, Dan. Unless you want to trade them off for something. I've got some Commandos and some Krieg boys looking for a home. I'm actually going to be posting those pretty soon here if I don't find anybody local that wants them. So we're going to look at Dejaf's incantation of Cursed Blades. It's an enchantment. And again, the enchantment just tells you what phase you get. Before we dig into this, first of all, let's talk about this right here. Players take it in turns during this step to choose wizards who aren't fleeing to attempt to cast spells. So what that tells me is that when it comes to magic in this phase, for example, I don't know for all phases, but in this phase, we alternate casting spells. So if it's my turn, I get to start, and then you get to cast. Then I get to cast. And we go back and forth till we've cast all the spells that we want to. Or whatever, however the rules are structured. That's just the interaction this is giving me. Like, this is what it's saying to me. Which is interesting. Just throwing something in the YouTube chat. It is an enchantment. Like I said, that just tells us when we get to use it. The casting value is 7+. Range is self. We're not going to worry about the effect just yet. Let's talk about the enchantment. Enchantment happens in the, whatever this phase is, strategy phase. There we go. Casting value of 7+. So that says to me that it's not the 40k style D6 on a 2-up, get your spell, right? That tells me we're probably rolling 2 dice. It is a more traditional psychic interaction. There may be some kind of interaction with your wizard level and stuff like that. Until your next start of turn subphase, any friendly unit, blah, 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 blah. Reroll any hit rolls to hit of a natural 1. So this spell lets you pick... Oh, it gives him an aura of reroll hit rolls of 1 for any undead within his command range. Now, we don't know what command range is yet. Again, I assume it's going to be a similar interaction to like what we see in AOS, where, you know, generals have this, this has this, and so on. They should be. They aren't, if I remember right, they're not one of the main factions. I could be wrong on that. I have to check the list, Dan. But they did release a list that said, hey, here are the main factions for the narrative style of it. And then here is what else is available. And I don't remember if High Elves were on the main or the everything else that's available. But I can't see why your chariots wouldn't be available. I think we're going to be seeing the full range and plus maybe a little bit extra. But having an aura of reroll hit rolls of 1 isn't terrible. You know, I don't know how it compares to old Tomb King stuff, because that is an army I never really got to see on the table. And then the final step in this phase is rally fleeing troops. This is when the active player must attempt to rally all of their units that are fleeing. You choose a unit, roll 2 dice against the leadership characteristic. If you fail, it will continue to flee during the movement phase. If you pass, you're allowed a free reform, and basically you just go back to your game. We'll have more on a later article on morale. And then they still have -1 to leadership when under half strength. And then if you're under 25%, you need natty snake eyes. But again, going back to this casting value. Like I said, this tells me we're probably doing a 2 dice casting check. We may have some sort of interaction with the wizard levels. Again, this is pure speculation. I'm curious to know if this is going to be each wizard will get to attempt to deny in each phase within a specific range. And the way you balance that out is you just make the range fairly short, right? So that we're not just like constantly spamming denies all turn. You know, like make the range to deny like 12 or 18 rather than the, 30 in AOS or 24, and then the, I think it's 18 in 40k, or used to be. So it's one of those, like, I think what's happening here, and this is pure speculation from what we're reading, but I think what's happening here is you're just going to get to cast your spells in whatever phase you're supposed to cast your spells. And then I'm guessing that opponents will get their chance to deny. And I don't know that it'll be limited to, like, this wizard can only deny once. Although the only reason I think that is that could get to be a pain in the ass to track when we're talking about casting through multiple phases. Did this guy already deny this phase or not? So I'm curious to see. This is just me thinking out loud. But it tells me, like I said, that probably seeing just a slight tweak on the old version of the Magic rules. There's a lot more to clue you in on, blah, 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 blah. Coming months, we'll be tackling the rest of the phases, plus rules for magic, morale, psychology, and other matters. Factions, the setting, the models, and the future of the game, only here on WarhammerCommunity.com. So that was the big rules preview that they did. And like I said, I'm pumped. I think it looks fantastic. I can't wait to get my stinky poopy knights on the table and just be kind of a jerk about it. Not really. Like, Bretonians are not oppressive. They're just an army that requires a lot of skill. So that was it. Before we do anything else or hop off, is there anything any of the viewers would like to go over or cover? Do we want to look at maybe like some of the old army books? Do we want to dive into any of the older rules and see how the game interacts? Is there anything you guys want? Do you want to do some 40K stuff? You tell me before I move on to anything else. While they're doing that, let's articles. Let's see what old world stuff is up while everybody's thinking about it. We did that. First of all, that dude, so cool. I'm pumped. Let's go. So cool. Knights of the Realm on foot. Those are awesome too. And then the old Pegasus Knights. Heck yeah, man. Knights of the Realm. Men at Arms. What was the list of armies? Oh, okay. Let's check it out. Oh, that's not what we wanted. Boop. Actually, should have it right here. Was it this one? Might be this one. Main factions revealed. There it is. Okay. So, Old World Development Diary. Dan on Twitch wanted to know if we could check this out, so let's check it out. Who, where, and when. Over the last few weeks, we've shown you previews of new models, shown off freshly painted examples of returning favorites, and all kinds of other stuff. The game will be set firmly within the old world itself, the lands between the coast of Bretonia to the west and the World's Edge Mountains to the east during the decades immediately before the Great War against Chaos and the Siege of Prague. Much of the action in the first wave of books and supplements takes place in and around the Border Princes, the barrier lands between the Empire and Orc army. Accordingly, we will be focusing on 9 core factions. And Border Princes was actually a campaign that was in one of the older general handbooks, if you guys haven't seen that. So the core factions: the Empire of Man, Orcs and Goblins, Dwarf Mountain Holds, Warriors of Chaos, Kingdom of Bretonia, Beastman Brayherds, Wood Elf. Okay, so the High Elves were one of the main ones, and the Tomb Kings. So one of the armies I'm interested in here is the Wood Elf ones. And the reason is because some of that Wood Elf line moved to AOS, and it's still in AOS. So I'm curious to know if they're going to re-release Dryads and I think Tree Men, yes. I think they've already said that. But I'm curious to see if we're getting new Dryad models, or if it's just going to be the AOS kit. Tomb Kings of Khemri, and let's see. So these will have the rules published alongside the launch of the Old World. Pivotal players in the events covered in the narrative expansions and supplements. Fans of these armies can also look forward to some shiny new miniatures that will accompany the return of many of the classic kits. The Old World before, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, so this is like one of the old tree men right here. He's actually pretty cool looking. Like it's definitely a throwback. Like it is a throwback model. It looks old. It looks a little goofy, but it's part of the charm. My ears are super itchy. I'm sorry. I'm not picking at them. They just get like this in the winter. In the arboreal gloom, the seafaring high elves of Uthwan. Uh, and then the other factions, certain other factions, blah, 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 blah. They're not part of the narrative, but will be provided with the rules at the launch of the game. So armies that will have rules but won't be part of the narrative are the Dark Elves, Skaven, Vampire Counts, Demons of Chaos, Ogre Kingdoms, Lizardmen, and Chaos Dwarves. You will get their rules as free PDFs as a service to fans who have these plastic armies on their shelf. You can bring them. We don't plan to publish rules for Age of Sigmar minis, except for those that were part of the game and setting during the final edition of Warhammer Fantasy Battles. So what that means is if it's a new Sigmar mini, it will not have rules. If it is an old Sigmar mini, it will have rules. And that's all that means. And I'm not sure at this point because I don't play a ton of Sigmar, so I'm not 100% sure what's still there. I know for a long time the Dark Elves were there. I know a lot of the dwarf stuff used to be there in the Empire. So these are basically the predecessors to the Gorgrunthas. These are the old orc boar riders. What are the other armies up to? Blah, 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 blah. The von Karsteeds were all dead after the Vampire Wars. With their defeat, other vampires went into hiding and became less active, waiting until the world became safe for them to emerge once more. Dark Elves, Lizard Men, Chaos Dwarves, and Ogre Kingdoms are all based far from the old world, and during this period are very inward-looking and insular. Are very inward-looking and insular races. Oh my gosh, I love these birds. They're so cool. I'm ready. Dan, I hope you also have this, the Bird Chariot. Please tell me you do. I used to have so many of these handsome devils. So that's it. That covers, like the factions, the free PDF of rules, and I'm sure like they'll get balance updates and stuff like that because I can't imagine they're going to be cut out of the game completely. It's one of those. I have to imagine what this is their plan for the first edition of the game is here's the 9 core races. Let's test the waters. If the game does well and we renew it for a second season, right? Then we start working in other things for the narrative and blah, 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 blah. So again, look forward to it. Look forward to bashing butts with some various fantasy races. I'm hoping to get my Bretonians kind of fleshed out a bit more. I have to look and see what I actually have. It was like an eBay lot that's like a rescue. It was really banged up and beat up. Took a lot of stripping and some priming, and we're going to get painting on them. But it's like, I don't know, 20 to 25 knights and something else. I forget what else. Some men at arms. I also have this handsome fella that I've been working on. Woo! No, he's not a Bretonian. But I like the Dark Elf models, so I picked up some. Mostly because I wanted that Charybdis, or as he is called. It was not in the Island of Blood box. I can tell you that, because I had 2 of those as my start for my High Elf army. But the Charybdis is known as Charybdis in this house. And if you have any idea what that refers to, I'm sorry, you now get in on the joke. But yeah, no, the Island of Blood box, let's see, ad coming in a minute. Isle of Blood Warhammer Fantasy Contents was a lot of Skaven. I do remember that. Oh, I was like, what? 60 pounds? I'll buy it. 70 minis. Think about that. 70 minis. Whew. You got a high elf prince on a griffin. I remember him. A high elf mage, 10 of the Lawthorn Sea Guard, and then the Swordmasters of Hoth, and then 5 Illyrian Reavers. And man, I forgot about the Swordmasters. Those things are dumb. Because great weapons always had a fight last rule, and I'm sorry for the noisy chair. I'm just fat. Great weapons had a rule where you always fought last, but elves had a rule where you always fought first, and it was the poopy duty. Because if I remember right, it wasn't you always fight last. It was like you fought at initiative 1 or something. I could be wrong, but anyway, silly game. No, that's not what you want. We can actually jump back to here. Development diary. We'll scan through this. I think we already looked through this though. Breaking the enemy. Yeah, we did. But man, look, how cool is that, man? Just like a big castle, some hills. I'm about it. I am so ready. That is really, really well done scenery. Situations. Oh, I don't know if you're still on here, Proxy Hammer, and I'll type it in the chat. But I've just happened to remember this. Situations where a single spell can decide the outcome of a battle are rare. The focus has shifted from keeping track of dice pools or hands of cards onto the positioning of wizards. So let's quote that and then end quote that. Okay. So that's it, man. Like, that really covers everything I wanted to. I wanted to go over the rules. I wanted to kind of discuss what was happening and get everybody up to the same page that I'm at. I hope everybody looks forward to the launch of this as much as I do. I will be doing we're going to dip back into the Drukhari Codex here this week also. Actually, maybe next week. I have a big VA appointment on Thursday. You guys want to hear a funny story? We're going to wrap this up, but I'm going to share this funny story. If you stayed till the end, and you want to laugh at somebody else's misfortunes, I'm going to share mine with you. For those that don't know, because I know not everybody who watches is in America, the VA is the Veterans Administration. I am a veteran. I was an infantryman in the U.S. Army. I was in the invasion of Iraq. I went back for the occupation of Iraq. I spent about 26 total months in Iraq. And then, when I got out, the VA is who I talked to about like my education benefits, my disability pension that I get from the VA, stuff like that. So right now I'm in the process of getting my benefits re-rated. And a lot of it has to do with, I've struggled with what was diagnosed basically as ADHD, but the problem with that is that there's a lot of overlap with ADHD and traumatic brain injury and post-traumatic stress. And I have suffered multiple concussions in the military, as well as just getting blown up also just rattles your brain. I've been, in close proximity to RPG attacks and IEDs, things of that nature. So it's one of those, like, just getting your little brain rattled around in your box can also cause long-term damage and effects. So what was diagnosed as ADHD may not be ADHD, but it can be treated like ADHD. So the Adderall has helped a ton, because a lot of the issues that I've had over the last 5-ish or so years, I've not really had in my younger days. I've had people be like, oh, well, it could just be undiagnosed ADHD. And I'm like, well, it could just not be ADHD. That's just the label they gave it. So it's one of those where, that's how we got here, right? Is having that. Well, I'm getting re-rated, and they got to go through, and I've told the story about like having the meeting with a third party, and the lady was just like, you need to go get help. Like, you need to go get diagnosed through your counselor, and you need to get this taken care of, and you need meds. Like, you need to. Within 15 to 20 minutes of our conversation, she was just like, go get yourself taken care of. Like, you're out of control. Not like out of control, but you know what I mean. So that being said, did that. Sent it into the VA. They have to review it, and that's fine. But then what ends up happening is now I have to go to the VA, and I have to meet with the compensation and pension counselor so they can review the paperwork and they can determine whether or not this third party person knows what they're talking about based off of their opinions with me. So they send me an appointment and they're like, hey, you need to go to the clinic. Now, is 100% my fault. I don't check to see which clinic. I just assume it's the clinic I go to normally. I assume it's the closest one to my home, which is still about a 20 to 25 minute car ride. So I go to the one that's closest to my home. I show up and I talk to the lady. I'm like, hey, I need to check in for my appointment, blah, 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 blah. She looks at me and she was like, oh no, you're in the wrong place. And I just stopped and I looked at her and I said, I'm supposed to be in Chicago, aren't I? And she said, yep. And like I said, that is 100% my fault. I should have checked. So I said, hey, this is going to shock everybody, but I'm not going to make it to Chicago in the next 20 minutes. So who do I need to call to get it rescheduled? So she gives me the number. I call them. I called and the guy answers and he's just like, yo, what up, dude? Like, super professional. I love it. And I said, hey, man, I went to the wrong clinic. I'm not going to make my appointment unless there's a way we can do it like over Zoom or telehealth, because it's just for an evaluation of this, blah, 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 blah. Nah, dude, we don't do that. I literally just did it. Like, why don't we do that? Like, I've already met with a psychologist over Zoom. They prescribed amphetamines to me over Zoom. Why can I not do this appointment over Zoom? Nope, we need to physically have you in the clinic. But why? Well, it's policy. Ah, okay. Well, I need to reschedule. Well, we can get you in the second. Sure, man. So, get it rescheduled. I talked to a buddy who works for the VA, and he's like, no, you should be able to get it Zoom. So I call in, and I'm talking to the lady who's like we're at the main VA office, effectively, or call center. And I'm like, hey, here's what's going on. The appointment's in Chicago. It's only 60 miles away, but the problem is that when you account for traffic, it's anywhere from an hour and a half to 2 hours from my house. Plus parking and everything else. Like, I'm not trying to deal with this. I don't understand why we can't have a Zoom or telehealth call. And she was like, oh, well, we can put in a request for it, but before you do that, you need to reschedule your appointment. Well, I did that. Can we go ahead and put that request in? Because it's already done. My appointment is on the 2nd of November. Keep in mind, this was 5 days ago today, maybe 6. So he pushes it a week out is all that happened. And she's like, oh, okay, the 2nd of November? Yeah, we can put that request in. Let me get some information from you. She takes my information. And she was like, I just want to confirm your appointment's on the 2nd of November, right? And I was like, yeah. And then she says, okay, somebody's going to reach out with you in the next 30 days to let you know if you can do that. I couldn't even say anything. I was just like we just talked about when my appointment is, and you're telling me I'll hear somebody within a month? Why even waste our time? And to the shock of no one, I still haven't heard from them, right? So I'm going to be driving to Chicago in a couple days. So, and my adventures with the VA only get more entertaining as I keep talking. So, but I wanted to share that with you. That's why I may not get to the Drukari video till next week, because I may have to spend most of my day in Chicago, which is one of my least favorite places in the whole wide world. If you sat through that story, I appreciate you. Thanks for listening. And if you were only here for the rules and you're already gone, I still appreciate you anyway. You guys have a great day. I look forward to getting some more content up for everybody. And, oh, doubles tournament in December. We'll do a recap on that. Thanks a lot. Have a good one.